Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sunday Live. We are very pleased to have Zoya Ahmed join us this evening. And first, I'm going to open with a poem, and I chose Naomi Shihab Nye, Making a Fist. And the epigraph is Making a Fist epigraph. We forget that we are all dead men conversing with dead men. Jorge Luis Borges. For the first time on the road north of Tampico, I felt the life sliding out of me, a drum in the desert, harder and harder to hear. I was 7. I lay in the car watching palm trees swirl a sickening pattern past the glass. My stomach was a melon split wide inside my skin. How do you know if you are going to die? I begged my mother. We had been traveling for days. With strange confidence, she answered, when you could no longer make a fist. Years later, I smile to think of that journey, the borders we must cross separately, stamped with our unanswerable woes. I who did not die, who am still living, still lying in the back seat behind all my questions, clenching and opening one small hand. That's Naomi Shihab Nye. We have, here's the bio for Zoya. Let's see here, we have you. I'm going to unmute you, Zoya. Okay. Zoya Ahmed is the Sonoma County Youth Poet Laureate. She was not only a 2019 California Poetry Out Loud finalist, but she won the 2019 California's Poetry Ourselves competition with her original poem, A Concerto of Spice. With her passion for social justice, she also directed and performed in the 2020 Martin Luther King Jr. Assembly at Maria Carrillo High School. Ahmed attempts to embrace her rich South Asian ancestorhood and confront the minutiae of privilege and power, microaggressions, and the facade of the American dream. She hopes that her poems give all those who are silenced a voice. And before we get to her poems, I'm going to ask her our standard question here, which is, Zoya, welcome. And if you could please tell us about a book or author that has been influential or meaningful to you.
Well, I have my book right here. I actually looked at it this morning. It's quite worn, but it's Shel Silverstein's Where Does the Sidewalk End? And I just turned 18 like a couple of days ago. So I feel like I'm still rooted in my childhood. Can't come to terms with becoming an adult. But I feel like a lot of our poetry journeys as poets begin with either Shel Silverstein or with Dr. Seuss. And that's really where my poetry journey began. And honestly, this book, though it like has some childish themes as it's meant for children, there are some poems that I still look to this day because they have these deeper meanings. And when we're children, we don't really realize these differences between us. We don't know about gender or race or privilege. But as you grow up, you kind of lose this innocence. So even as a youth, you're kind of getting desensitized to things that you don't know about. And I feel like it's nice to go back and see how I was in my childhood and goes back to those roots.
Oh. Is there a poem from Where the Sidewalk Ends that you'd like to share?
For sure. I marked a tab. I think this poem is kind of relevant, especially with everything that's going on right now, especially with the divisions in our country and just a very charged social environment. And it's called The Generals. Said General Clay to General Gore, "Oh, must we fight the silly war? To kill and die is such a bore." "I quite agree," said General Gore. Said General Gore to General Clay, "We could go to the beach today and have some ice cream on the way." "A grand idea," said General Clay. Said General Clay to General Gore, "We'll build sandcastles on the shore," said General Gore. "We'll splash and play." "Let's leave right now," said General Clay. Said General Gore to General Clay, "But what if the sea is closed today? And what if the sand's been blown away?" "A dreadful thought," said General Clay. Said General Gore to General Clay, I've always feared the ocean spray. And we may drown. It's true we may. It chills my blood, said General Clay. Said General Clay to General Gore, my bathing suit is slightly tore. We'd better go on with our war. I quite agree, said General Gore. Then General Clay charged General Gore as bullets flew and cannons roared. And now, alas, there is no more of General Clay and General Gore.
Yes,
That's very informative or applicable today. Yes. Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you for sharing about your book. What do you have to read for us or to present or perform for us first?
Well, my first poem I thought was fitting because even before our reading started, we were talking about the weather, and I thought it was just fitting with everything that's been happening and Mother Nature really acting up. I personally live in Northern California, so we are no stranger to wildfires, which happen almost every year. And even this year, it was quite close. Actually, the houses on my street were burned. Thank God our house was safe, but we had to evacuate for a very long time because Corona and then everything was just happening at once. So it was very overwhelming. But I wrote this poem kind of as a response to that. And wherever we are, I feel like Mother Nature is always a danger to where we live and our comfort. So it's called Mood Ring Speak Wisdom. My moods are rather turbulent, more than any ravaging storm. Her roots seep into the earth, my palms pierce the red dirt. A rusting iron band coiled around my finger, the center crystal omniscient. A plethora of Mother Nature's disaster. A thick, suffocating blanket of fog envelops the barren landscape, indecisive. Sheets of rain softly pours down, calm, relaxed. Hail, like shards of glass, pierces the stilled earth, surprised. The thunder rolls through the charcoal clouds as a beckoning drum, stressed. Streaks of prismatic lightning splits the skies, emotional. And all you have to predict, the devastation, the destruction, the drama, is a mere mood ring. Thank you.
I love the poem.
Thank you.
Many families had to relocate. Did you have to relocate at least for a time?
Yes, I did. In 2017, I think was my freshman year. It was really bad. And it was the first time our community was experiencing something like this to like the degree. And I think a neighborhood nearby was completely burned. There was nothing left and was completely flat. And so many of the students in our school had to evacuate. So it was quite traumatic. And the next 2 years, we had the smoke, but it wasn't really affecting our community. It was a little far away. And then this year, when the fire came back so suddenly and so quickly near community, it was quite devastating. Full closure for my high school experience, starting freshman year and then ending senior year with a fire. But yeah, we did have to relocate because our street was just closed down for a while. And because it was coronavirus, my dad actually thought, hey, let's just travel across the country to live with family. So I lived in New York for about a month until we came back.
Mm-hmm. And I know some people that were in that same region that did something similar. And also some other individuals that because of living through the fires, it generated other activism, other volunteerism. And some became volunteer firefighters. Some of them worked for volunteer organizations. Did that energy or did that come through in your life in other ways besides your writing, or was it mainly through your writing that you wrote about the fires or did something about the environment in that way?
It was a lot through my writing, only because during the coronavirus, I kind of was feeling helpless because my parents, of course, there was a lot of social justice and activism at the time, but my parents personally are doctors, so you can't really win an argument with them about going outside during coronavirus. So being the Sonoma County Youth Poet Laureate, I took my writing as kind of a platform to talk about these things. But I did work in my school, like it gave me the time to reflect on my environment and specifically social justice in general and the lives of people of color in my community. And so I
Mhm.
try to focus my activism still through my writing, but in a more active way. As writing something like a proposal for my school, how to like talk about these specific issues, but in our school environment and how that's affecting students.
Mhm. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. So maybe here's something else.
Yes, of course. Um, so going back to just being a student and in high school, I feel like I'm tired all the time. So I kind of wrote this poem when I was doing all this stuff, especially I feel like the environment is so competitive these days for the youth in regards to not only college and this competitive atmosphere of this race to go who can be the most accomplished, but also what it means to be a student and a youth in such in a changing environment like this. Like it's not like we're just doing this for college anymore. It's we're fighting for our futures. But in that, you can get pretty tired, as I do. So it's called Tired Says Hello. My eyes are naturally droopy, my mind constantly delirious, and my bones always sore. After a 6-hour flight, I stare at the mirror, and there is a sheen on my face of tired, a shade of pale, and a tint of lifeless. I try to get the tired out of me with hours of sleep, shots of bitter tea, and stress, but my eyes are naturally droopy, and my mind is constantly delirious, and my body is floating rather than living. I come to the realization that tired is a part of me, creeping inside of me and peeking out of me through drooping eyelids, through folds of clustered wrinkles. That must be it. Inside of me dwells a tired soul. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Continuing on, I have another poem, and going past, I think, on more deeper issues, something that really hits me and is really important with me is empathy and race, and how that is working on our in our country and has for multiple centuries. I feel like, especially with the riots at the Capitol that we saw, um, people, I remember a senator saying how this is a time to kind of look at the beauty of things and hope. And I completely agree that we have to hope to think better for our country. But in that, I felt like it was belittling everything that has happened in our past, and that our country is built on things that have been happening for centuries. It's not just these riots or this short period of time that we have to look at the beauty of our country, but the fact is that our country's past hasn't been as beautiful. And people of color have been experiencing loss and injustice for so long that it's ingrained to our heritage and our culture. So I wanted to go on about those topics in my poem called Blood. Blood. It's a novel within itself, an art form of fluidity and story, a barren blank canvas aching to run, a landscape of the abstract and familiar. Blood is the rich artistic fuel that flows within, and the artist is ready to tear its masterpiece to pieces. We are ready to spill our own blood. And then continuing on from that, I come from a South Asian heritage, as you recalled in my bio, and being South Asian, you kind of grow up with this idea of the Commonwealth, and that's not really that big in the United States, but of course the UK and the US are very different. But within that, coming from these countries, you realize that we have this history of being colonized. And that's something that's not new for people of color at all. And that's a part of our history that kind of seems to be overlooked in a way because we're so focusing on these current issues that we forgot about this history, like I talked before. So specifically talking about my history and my heritage, it's this poem is called Colonize. Colonized my country, my mother and father, colonized my land and home. took, no stole the beauty of my land, stole peppercorn spices, never offering a hand, stripped our trees of bark, leaves, berries, and broke. We broke under your chains, shackles, and bolts, beaten, lynched, sold in our land. That wasn't enough, so you took, giving us a dirty look, colored me brown, 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 like the mud underneath our feet. The mud is underneath our skin, colonizer, because roots and flowers grow within us. Gamal, neem, mehendi leaves, gulab, nargis, and gandega pool grew within us from pools of tears. Ones you can never take. Color me brown, colonizer, brown like the sons you have killed, killed beneath your boots, brown like their mothers and fathers killed by hearing the news, brown like their friends and followers killed in the wake of being colored by you. Color me colonizer, but color the blood underneath your boots too. Thank
Fabulous.
you. Thank you so much.
Fabulous. I want to pause long enough here for just a moment to say I am so grateful for your wisdom and your words and your youth and where you're moving forward from right now. Because, and I know I'm not the only one here. I know I'm not the only one here because it gives us hope. It gives us hope.
Thank you. That means a lot.
We have, you're welcome. And we have a question from Laura Mahal, and she's asking, when you are composing your poetry, do you listen to music? Any favorite singer or songwriters who fuel your creativity?
That is such a great question. I haven't been asked that before, but it's so true. I listen to music a lot when I'm doing my poetry because everything is just, it's an experience. I feel like listening to poetry is an experience, and then also writing poetry is an experience. And it's being an artist, any artist, I've noticed that it's becoming completely vulnerable, whether you're writing it or performing it, and it's letting your audience decide about everything that's within you. You're giving it your all. And so in music, it lets me connect with that deeper essence of myself and what I want to tell the world, because essentially my poetry is a platform. And my dad says how a lot of people don't have this platform that you have. So you have to use it, and you have to say your message in whatever you present. So that's why I usually have these themes in my poetry readings, because I know that I don't want to miss that chance of speaking my truth and speaking my message. So some specific artists that I've listened to, Beyonce. I listened to Beyonce so much, especially when her album came out, Black is King. That was so inspiring, and I listened to that on repeat for my poems. I also listened to Jorge Smith. She had a song, I think it was called By Any Means, that came out, I think, when all the movements were happening, the BLM protests, and or it was before, I don't really know, but it was related to that. And so I definitely listen to a lot of music like that, a lot of music that's specifically about social justice. And then recently, we had our Martin Luther King Assembly, which happens every year. And I usually try to take part in that because it's such an amazing platform for students to show their talent and art, and then of course speak of Dr. King's amazing legacy. And so for that assembly, I'm always like thinking of what songs should I put in it. So I get really inspired by songs that came out during the civil rights movement, specifically in the 1960s and such. So I really can't remember, like it's just slipping out of my mind, but songs from that era, especially jazz and blues, I try to listen to those also when I'm writing my poetry.
Fantastic. It's okay that you don't remember everything. You have a lot going on here, and that was a great answer. Yes. What else do you have to read for us?
For sure. So I have another poem, and I'd like to specifically talk about the women in my family, because women are so important in my identity, especially my grandmother and my mother, and how they've shaped my character. In South Asian culture, you're basically brought up, if you're a girl, you're brought up by the women in your family. And there's kind of this separation between the men and the women, and how they teach the children. Of course, that's different here as compared to in Pakistan, because I'm growing up in more progressive modern society, surrounded by many cultures. And of course, the time is different as well. But there's still this connection with the women in your family teaching you about their wisdom and what comes with that. And especially being a woman of color, it's hard. It's really hard because you're having these two factors that make people judge you and basically define your character while you're breaking all these barriers. So I like to bring up, of course, my role models time to time in my poetry readings. And this poem is called Lala. And just as some background, Lala isn't the word for grandmother in Urdu. It's Nani if it's from your mother's side. But it's a funny story because my cousin Lala was someone like I don't really remember, but it was someone in Pakistan. And when he went there, he picked up that name and he started calling my grandmother that, and it just stuck. So now we all call her Lala. And she's basically the woman who defined my life, because we grew up in the New York suburbs, and my parents were both immigrants. So my dad was redoing his medical residency, and my mother was going to the library to learn English. And so it was basically a hectic childhood. I didn't always know where my parents were, but I lived in an extended 26-member joint family. So I always had like aunts and uncles to look over me, but specifically my grandmother was always there. So when my mom went to the library, she would be the one to take care of me. So this poem is an ode to her. Lala, 1983. I wonder what her first smell was. First taste, first sound, first sight, the rusted green copper of the ethereal lady gripping her glowing torch. My grandmother saw an image of sacrifices, dreams, and burning futures in that woman. She watched her life slip by in the honey hue of the statue's fire. But I, the American-born Desi, see my life in her. The woman who cradled me when my forehead felt hot to the touch. The woman who pulled out every toy from the top cabinet upon my command. The woman who yearns to hear my laughter echo in her house again. The woman who asked me, "Beta, kya chahiye?" She carries my life, my tears, my country. These women raised America, fed the country innovation and change. Their faces don't have to be painted in red, white, and blue for us to know that they are our past, our present, and our future. When her footsteps sank into this country's soil, she cast her light cotton dupatta off, a city woven in every thread, a worn tapestry of Karachi. She didn't know that the sights, the smells, the sounds, and tastes had seeped into her tender skin. That the everything and nothing she brought with her would build the foundations of my life, its glass towers and its concrete jungles. In my mind, America isn't a country. It's each color in the palette that paints her complexion. The pink of gulab, the golden sticky dew of a jalebi, and the shade of a warm, milky cup of chai. It's her face staring back at me. Thank you.
I'm so glad you read that one. I saw that one online, and it was just so beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful
Thank you so
piece
much.
about family culture, which fires off many possible questions for you. So I'll try to settle down into a couple of them. And I'm curious about, there's this extended family, and your mom is a language learner. I was teaching ESL, English as a second language, at a college for a while. And it's something that's very near and dear to me. But I'm thinking about, here you have two parents driven in careers, extended family. Who might have been a role model for your writing or for poetry?
Well, when I started my poetry, it actually began in my sophomore year with winning that competition poetry ourselves. And I'm more of a performer than a writer. I'll tell you that first off. English is my third language, and I've been struggling with it since I've been born. It's not my specialty at all. But when I started with Poetry Aloud, it was a poetry recitation contest. And I picked a poem that was close to my heritage, of course, because I thought, I don't know anything about English, but if I'm going to do anything related to it, I'm going to do something that I definitely know about. And that's my history and my heritage and my culture. And so I kept on winning and winning until I got to the state level. And that year they had this new competition called Poetry Ourselves. And it was basically submitting a original composition. And at the Senate chambers in our state capital, if you won, you could read your original poem. And I thought, it was a Friday, it was a deadline. I'll quickly jot this down. I'll just turn it in, and I know I have no chance of winning. But in that first poem called A Concerto of Spice, I talked about, of course, my mother and my grandmother once again, and the spices and how that's so relevant. Cooking is so relevant in Pakistani culture, and how you kind of grow up with that. So my family and the women in my family are basically my muse. But specifically in writing, I think my father kind of played a big role in that. He was also a poet, and it's really funny. But when my mother and my father were getting married, he was like, "Oh, what should I give her for wedding?" And he was very unconventional, and he wrote a bunch of poetry in this book, and he just gave it to her. The funny thing is, my mom hates poetry, so she was like, "Oh, like." She was like, "No, please stop. Like, I don't want to listen to poetry anymore." And he was such an avid poet, because shairi, which is poetry, is so important in Urdu. And Urdu is our native language of Pakistan. And it's a very poetic language. It stems from Persian or Farsi. And there's two renditions of it. So Urdu and Hindi are basically the same thing, but Urdu is more poetic. And it basically, when Pakistan was being liberated, a very famous poet actually brought on the revolution with his poetry. So his poetry was very active, very political. And as time went by, poetry in Pakistan it was very romantic, it was very touching, a lot about sorrow. So my dad kind of grew up in that, like in his Urdu class, this is what he would read, and he came to love it. But when I was growing up, my mom wasn't a fan, so they didn't talk about it for a long time. But when I started writing poetry, we kind of bonded on that experience, and him being a poet and kind of teaching me about Urdu and my language. So I think he's a big part of my writing as well.
That's a beautiful insight to the evolution of your writing and how it plays in your family. And I wanted to take a moment about the Lala poem from Beth Copeland, in case you didn't see. There are a couple of comments. One was, "Wow, beautiful," from Robert Costa. The second one was Beth Copeland, "Wonderful poem. You do such a wonderful job of creating scenes with images in your work."
Thank you. Really
Heartedly agree with those comments, and I'm hoping, if you hadn't planned on reading it, I'm hoping you'll read the Concerto of Spices.
I do not have it on me right now.
Yes,
I'm sorry. I have like this document open.
Yes, people can find it online. It's beautiful. So yes.
Thank you. Thank
Sorry
you.
for putting you on the spot. So.
Yes, but I do have a poem related to that, which I think you might like equally as well. And you talked about teaching ESL, and I immediately thought I wrote a poem called ESL, basically on the experiences with me and my mother. So I'll read that, and hopefully you will like it just as well. So
Here we go. Yes. Yeah.
So ESL, Smithtown, New York, 2004. My teacher hastily pointed to the colorful placards clinging to the highest part of the wall, as if they were an emblem for American education. I mouthed foreign tasting words, alfaz in my mouth, A for apple, B for boy, and so on. The words bittersweet, distant, and yet the teacher passionate, as if my entire future being born as an American citizen was rooted in my ability to say apple and boy without instinctually saying seb or lerka. When my teacher showed me tempting pictures of juicy ruby red apples, I'd seen that passion and expectation-filled stare before, in a similarly dull and daunting room as that of my ESL classroom. The teacher hastily pointed to the colorful placards, but to my mother, who stared at those cards, her forehead soaked in a sheen of sweat, her light lavender chiffon dupatta draped gracefully on her shoulders. I sat idly on the gray and navy carpet then, paying more attention to my toys than to the teacher shoving bittersweet alfaz words into my mother's throat. 1 year later, a teacher stared at me now. Before did she or anyone know why the words tasted so bittersweet. Far did anyone look past the facade of those happy children drawn on those alphabet cards. Scene for Seb, a glossy red apple, displayed like a ruby in the houses fortunate enough to afford it. Lam for Larka, a starving sunburned boy, his toes buried in the red earth, his fingertips grazed and cut by picking apples to provide for his family. A penny a day, days that he skipped school to work. That is our mother tongue, and that is why the words, the alfaz, seem so bittersweet behind those honey-filled images. Ask the immigrant voice. Thank you.
That is an amazing poem, Zoya. An amazing poem. I had some students whose parents back home were working 4 or 5 jobs to put them through college, community college here. And that is such a tribute to the spirit and the culture and what it is represented in language learning, but that bridge between the two and how hard it can be to bridge between the two, whether it's a foot in each or stepping back and forth between the two. So just lovely, absolutely lovely. There is a question. It's from Beth Copeland. Do you write within any traditional Urdu forms? Is the ghazal popular in Pakistan? Or ghazal?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I just heard ghazal. I was like, yes, it definitely is. That is one of the poetry forms that my dad puts on a lot on YouTube, because ghazals are a very they're very relevant in music and classical Indian music as well. And because people are always searching for lyrics, I think poetry provides the best lyrics for any song, and songs and music are basically definitely related to that. But I do not write Urdu. I feel like that is one of my main downfalls in my life, and I would love to learn how to do it someday. I speak fluently, but I think it's just the calligraphy and the letters are just too hard for me to understand in writing. But I definitely wish to write them someday. And even in my poems, when I do have Urdu words, I usually spell them out in English words. So like alfaz, it wouldn't be in the traditional English letters, but in like AL, like with English letters. So, but I hope to learn someday. That would be amazing.
That's wonderful. There's as a direct message, but I will give it to you later. It's something for you that is partially in Urdu that somebody submitted for you.
Oh, that's great.
So how about something else to read?
For sure. So this next poem really means a lot to me because I wrote this quite recently. And it was before the election. So it was for getting the youth to vote, because I think that's so important. And now that I'm 18, that's like one of my biggest things. I really wanted to vote. A lot of people in my family, unfortunately, do not vote, even though I push them a lot to. But that's a great privilege for me, especially being an immigrant, coming from immigrant parents in this country, that it means a lot. And so when I was writing this poem, I didn't really think about what it would mean after the election. I just thought, okay, this is a way to persuade people. But after election, I felt it held even more value, especially after seeing what happened at the Capitol. I was really moved by it after reading it again, because I feel like people forget the value of having an election and the vote in this country, and how so many immigrants move to this country for that privilege. And it really is a privilege to elect someone and put them in power that speaks for you and what you need. And these people are working day and night to pass these policies for the good of the people. And at the end of the day, our country is based and the government is based in the people. And so I thought of, the iconic thing from government, because I am taking government this year. So for the people, by the people. Um, and I just took on that and I wrote this poem. So it's called For the People. The people of rolling green, spotted with wildflowers which glow gold. The people of brisk morning mist tasting of salted ocean spray, waves crashing against a coast. The people of evergreen sprigs and pine infumed trails and paths. The people of money-making fads, the people of stock and gas, the people of sales and tax. By our people we hear cries, the bitter aftertaste of gunshots ringing in our halls. By our people do we breathe, and yet some gasp, dying within the brawls. By our people do we bleed that blood that runs through us all. By our people the rich lie, by our people the poor stay on the streets, by our people the innocent die. For the people we beat the drums like thunder rolling in the clouds of fate. For the people we march, one step after another, raising our fists in solidarity. For the people we call them to acknowledge the adversity. For the people we provide rights, freedoms, and privilege. For the people we humanize and empathize with their burdens. For the people is the vote. The vote encapsulates all of what stays and goes, the private and public, what we know and do not know. The vote encourages people to embrace themselves, people to celebrate others. The vote embodies every march, every movement, every single step of progress. The vote embodies voices of those who have sacrificed it all, leaders, martyrs, speakers. Our government, our country, our past and future. The vote is a choice of the people, by the people, for the people. Thank you.
Wonderful. It's a wonderful. Everybody's clapping in the little windows. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think that holds even more power now. Yes, just like you were saying.
For sure. Yeah, it definitely touched me. And thank God I can vote now. So moving on, another poem that's a bit lighter in its topic, but I think it's very relevant. And I've started to write a lot about some things are quite existential and what it means to be human, because of course our fate is always on the line of whether we're going to live or die the next second, with everything that's happening. And I feel like being human, it's all in the uncertainty. Our lives depend on it, and also our lives sway in the balance of it. So I wrote this poem called Sky Valley, and originally I wasn't thinking this when I wrote this, because I was just on the internet and I saw this ad for I think ski chalet called Sky Valley, and I was like, wow, like that title is great. I would love to write a poem about it. Of course, it's swayed in a different direction, but that's where the title stems from. So Sky Valley. I look up at the sky and it's simple. It's blank and blue, colorful while being colorless. Imagine if we could float without the weight of our problems chained to our feet, without killing ourselves, without killing the beauty of paradise, killing for the material things. We wouldn't be human. Exhausting and monotonous, dreary and endless. I don't want to be human anymore. To lose myself in the dirt, the grass, the gold. I want to be a cloud by day and a star by night. I want to live in Sky Valley. Thank you.
Lovely. Yes. I'm going to back up a little bit. You had talked about how you talked exuberantly about how pleased you are about having the ability to vote, and how some family members may not vote yet or take it with that same exuberance. Do you have any tips for young people, young adults who have family members who, do you have any great persuasive strategies that you are using on your family or friends that you might pass on?
Well, I definitely think talking about the importance of it is definitely something. I feel like we kind of tend to overlook or forget how important it is in our country, specifically with my family. And I think this might go for others as well, is that they forget that they have an importance in the process. And especially, I think I was learning this, but in California, we were like, we have like the late voting opportunity. So we see how the election is going, and we're like, okay, our vote doesn't really matter anymore. And some people just stop right there. And of course, it's a tedious process as well. But just reminding your family that, you know, as a as a citizen, or as a just a person of this nation, we have the ability to do this, to select someone who will talk for us. And a big thing is that some people think that we only have two choices, which I personally think is a problem. Our country is way too polarized. That might be just a personal thing, but that's what I believe. And in that, I feel like people are like, oh, well, I don't like any of them. Like, this person's not what I'm going for, but this person's also not what I'm going for. But in that, I feel like you have to go to the nitty gritty and just see, like, if you're not going to vote for anyone, people are going to select someone you might not like, and you will have to stick with that for 4 years. And the turmoil and the effort that goes into so many individuals and citizens fighting for what they believe in is all held in that vote that we can just go to the ballot box that day and drop it in. So a tip would be definitely to say that this is our right and we should make use of that. And then it's easier to complain once all is said and done. But at the end of the day, did we go there to the ballot box, and did we use that right? So I don't know. I feel like whenever they're complaining, you know, just the youth needed to say like, hey, well, you didn't vote at all. So we have to use that, you know.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for exploring that question.
Of course.
You ready
All
for
right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so the next poem, and sorry, I'm really sorry about my quality right now. Like, it's getting really dark and my light is just not great. So I'm sorry for my camera quality. But moving on to this next poem, it's called Feeling. And
your vibrancy.
thank you. So my next poem is called Feeling. And I was thinking about, like, when I'm writing my poems, when I first started writing my poems, I had a really clear vision about what I wanted to write, because I wanted to write a book. And this is essentially what was going in the book. So I had these 3 chapters called Mind, Body, and Soul. The book is not yet published. It was just an idea. But with every poem, I thought whether it would fit in this mind category, the body category, or the soul category. And my father is a doctor, so he was doing his fellowship at the time for mind and body wellness. So this look at how they're incorporating Eastern practices into Western medicine, because of course we, as people of color growing up in the East, they grew up with these medical practices like mindfulness and meditation. And now that's getting really popularized in the US, because in the Western world, chronic illnesses are a problem rather than these short, immediate illnesses. And chronic illnesses work better with Eastern practices. So he was telling me about his fellowship, and I was really interested because I want to go into medicine as well. But I thought about what makes us human, and I thought, well, that's feeling. So I was just sitting in the car that day, and I was thinking about all this. I'm like, I want to write a poem. So this is about my favorite feeling, and feelings in general, and this part of being human. So feeling. The best feeling in the world is when the chilled glass window gently presses against my cheeks until my whole face goes numb. Euphoria. As the brisk stream of air pushes through the glass, encapsulating miles of land, places I've been, the places I'll go to, the bright lights blurred as they pass by, the city and people towering over me, the muffled, muted sounds of voices in the background. I sit in the cushioned seat of that car, staring, breathing, and just about barely existing, a gentle numbness over every single detail in my life. I blend into the crisp ambiguity, the brisk warmth, the glow and silent hum of concrete facades. I feel the freshness and opulence of knowing that in that moment, The absence of feeling is the best feeling in the world. Thank you. And then going on, another poem that's kind of related to these three chapters of soul, mind, and body. This is called Mind. And when I was a teen, I still feel like a teen, but I feel like we are always met with this reaction of adults being like the angsty teen. And our tone and everything is on display. And especially my dad, when I remember feeling like frustrated or my tone goes up, he's always there like, oh, mind your tone. And I went into that. I'm like, what does tone mean? Because one day we were just talking and we were like, you know, you can say something horrible and you can say something nice, but if your tone is different, it can mean something completely different. So even if we're saying something that's truly filled with empathy or sympathy and our tone is different, it goes the wrong way. And I feel like that's so prevalent, especially on the news. I'm seeing people with just the wrong tone and I feel offense to that. So I went into that, like how important tone can be. And so this poem is called Tone. Tone and quality. I try to find the remote control, scroll through input, but there's no manual, no instructions besides pure, unfiltered emotions and feelings, raw like the sweet flesh of fruit, as if tone ripens on trees, is stripped of personality and shipped from factories pretend and co. We wear designer voices sweetened with hypocrisy, but the truth peels off, eventually, irreplaceable and priceless. But at least the anger, the seeds of bitterness are all that are left of our purchase, all 50% off. Thank you.
Yes. Wonderful. Clapping.
So this next poem is kind of related to the last two, but it's called Barcode. And as you might see, I draw a lot from pop culture, and I feel like that's really relevant for me because I'm in a first generation. So as a first generation immigrant, I'm kind of stuck between these two cultures. So a big defining factor of me being who I am, being an American born Desi, is the things around me, like capitalism, pop culture, what America is basically defined as. So I draw a lot from that, but also personal issues, being a woman of color. So this next poem is called Barcode, and it kind of talks to that. Congratulations, it's a girl. At that point, I would advise you that you put a barcode on my birth certificate. You brought me into this world as a beacon. You came to this country for hope. You set me up for success. But I'm sorry, the world was against you. It set me up for failure. My advice, you should have put yourselves first, for those are the rules of the fittest. One priority, to crave gold and cut through souls. Success could have been yours, but instead you got me, a closed door. I'm nothing but a price to them. So let them have it. When girl meets world, it's a barcode that permeates through her skin. I'm inked with my surface value, left for the consumer, advertised to the world who bends me into a number. I'm inspected, face value 10, body value 50, mind value 0. My lips aren't plump with fillers, my body isn't modified or reduced. My mind is worth millions. A foolish girl, didn't you know they don't care about your mind? All of them are just searching for your barcode. Thank you.
Yes. I
Oh,
think we have time for one more poem.
that's great. I only had one more poem too, so that fits. So my next poem, I'm going to end it with something that's very relevant to what we are facing. It's about the pandemic, which is no surprise to poets because I've seen a lot of poets touch on this because it's become such a big part of who we are, basically shaping history from henceforth. So it's called Pandemic Mortals. I face a future rewritten, post-determined, established and re-established before pen touches paper. We live through sickness and health, live through poverty and wealth. We live to death, to taste its bittersweet, or sour taste on our lips. Mortality is bliss, a reaper's kiss, like the vividness of a dream one never truly sees. It's a palette of wants and wishes, desires and regrets that hinge on despair. We cry for death, but the burden we cannot bear, guilty to leave all those alone. Our weight becomes weightless, our minds thoughtless, our hearts dead. No breath, no flow, no sight, no touch, no feel, no fight. The reaper tugs the souls of those who cry, for others it just slips by one's fingertips. As soft as gentle blow on dandelions, as sharp as a thin blade. Mortality is kissed between realities, to exist and then to slip into cracks, to depart to distance, to die. Mortality is bliss for those who don't live in the ignorance of a lie. Thank you.
Lovely, lovely sounds crashing together. Lovely reading. Yes.
Thank you so
Very,
much.
very powerful, Zoya. Very powerful. And it's what we need. It helps feed what I talked about earlier. Yes.
Thank you so much.
What I'd like to do is to open it up to Robert for a quick announcement, and then I would like to open it up to everybody so they can say thank you and talk with you about questions. Robert, are you ready for a quick announcement? I just sent you the thing to unmute.
Okay. Writing for Peace publishes an anthology twice a year now. And what we're doing right now is the theme is Letters from the Self to the World. The guest editor is Adriana Paramo. I'm going to post her message in our chat here. We're accepting poetry, prose, fiction, nonfiction, artwork, or any kind of hybrid writing that even remotely touches on letter writing at all. And the submission deadline is March 1st. And I'm going to cut and paste that right now.
That would be great. So Zoya, you should submit.
Yes, definitely, please.
I am going to switch it over to so I have now changed it so everybody can unmute yourselves. I want to say thank you again to Zoya. Thank you for being here and spending time with us. That was fabulous, fabulous energy, strong writing, and gives great hope, great hope. And all of the participants are now able to unmute themselves, unmute yourselves. So if you want to unmute yourself and say hello.
I just want to say that it was exuberating to hear somebody as young as you reading her poetry.
Thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
For sure. I mean, it's amazing being heard. And of course, as a youth, you taking the time to listen to me. That means a lot. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Who else?
Zoya, I found you to be incredibly inspiring, and your maturity and the breadth of your ability to put so many experiences into words is astonishing. And I would encourage my children to look you up and listen to your poetry and read your poetry. Thank you for giving us this time today and this inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm not sure who's on just iPhone. Otherwise, I'd poke at you and say, hey, come on.
Zoya, I just want to echo everything that everybody said. I'm so impressed with your work and just who you are. Thank you so much for being with us today. You really are an inspiration.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hearing you read tonight, and in terms of the ghazal, you can write them in English. I mean, a lot of there are a lot of English-speaking poets, who are writing ghazals, but I'm sure yours would be more authentic because you have heard them in their original language.
Yeah, for sure. That's an amazing point. And I when you said this and this point was brought up, I immediately thought, like, I need to talk to my dad again because I need to write something like this. So for sure.
Have you read the poet Agha Shahid Ali? He's a Kashmiri poet, And he's the poet that I really learned the ghazal from. You know, he writes these amazing poems where he's kind of melding Eastern and Western form and Eastern and Western sensibility. So if you haven't read his work, I think you would really enjoy it.
For sure. I believe I've read one of his poems. I can't really remember it right now when I was actually searching for my poetry out loud poems, but I'll definitely search him more. And it's amazing because my friend is actually Kashmiri, and their whole culture, even I come from Pakistan, which is very multicultural in a sense. But then you have these indigenous cultures within South Asian culture, which is just rich and beautiful. So when you brought him up, I definitely will search him. And it just brings me back to my friend and this beautiful culture. So
Anybody else? I had something I wanted to say, but I wanted to give other people a chance first. And I caught in there that you are probably going into medicine, and you're such a strong, you are a poet. You know, some people are writers, but I feel like you are really have this presence of poetry purpose. And I challenge you. This is like a personal challenge. I worked with this attorney who he was an attorney, but he also brought his poetry into the courtroom, and he would quote great literature to the judge and to the clients and the people on the stand. So my challenge to you was to maybe bring that poetry into the healing of souls or the healing of bodies, because it would be really sad not seeing you carry this forward, because you're such a strong presence in it right now. So just an observation.
My parents actually say the exact same thing, so I'll definitely keep that in mind. And hopefully, I mean, I actually just applied to my colleges. I think a couple of months back, so I'm about to hear from them. But if I get in, hopefully, I definitely will bring that along.
Wonderful, wonderful. And any other questions or hellos, or I don't see anybody coming out. So this I mentioned before the reading, I'm just taking over, downloading them and uploading them. It will be posted on the website, the Writing for Peace website. After it's edited, we'll take out the before show stuff and we'll get it posted, and I'll let you know. And I just want to say that you are a lovely role model for youth. And I know that when I have a chance, I'm going to be referring people to this segment, this episode, as somebody to watch for, somebody to check out, and somebody who is a really wise person in their youth.
Thank you. That really means a lot. I always I have poetry readings, and but I feel like it always stands out to me when we have this discussion, which is just amazing, which I really appreciate about this. And also, I'm Sonoma County's Youth Poet Laureate right now, but because the pandemic happened right when my term happened, I didn't get the same experience of these readings. So whenever I do have a reading, I'm so grateful, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. And of course, listening to my poetry, that really means a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome. You just reminded me I'm going to save the conversation so we can get those comments to you too. About that, there was let's see, no, it's not letting me see it. And it says it was a thank you. It's somebody from iPhones. I don't know who it was. Thank you. Shoot for the stars. You have a very bright future. Don't stop writing, even if you chose medicine. Best, Angela. And then Robert, thanks again. Your exuberance was eye-opening. And Adrian, it was a treat to hear your poetry, Zoya. Many thanks for sharing.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Yeah. So good night, everybody. Thank you again, Zoya.
Of course. Good night.
Good night. Thanks for coming, Beth, and your great questions.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I love these readings.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Take good care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.